Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Rowell and François.
Hi guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. This is episode number 145. I'm this week with Rowell. Hi Rowell, how are you?
Hey, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, very good. So today we're going to be talking about reporting and more specifically about the Ekahau template reporting options they have in their software to automate a little bit of the reporting process.
Yeah, it's a very useful feature within Ekahau, and I think it's underutilized by a lot of people because you do have the default templates that get included, but you can get a lot more detailed and customize a report based on whatever your needs are.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a learning curve as well to the feature, but once you see the possibility and the flexibility that it will bring to generating a report and producing a quality report, I think it's one of the best feature of the software.
It definitely saves a lot of time if you're doing a manual type of report, right? You may have your own template, but when it comes to pasting these images or pasting certain data that you want to get out of your designs, either your predictive or your validation surveys, then the Ekahau template reporting is going to be very useful because of these tags that are used. But maybe before we go into the tips, we can talk about why we use reports, how we use them, and that give it a little bit more context.
And also who uses reports, because like not everyone uses a report feature or even uses reports for any of their Wi-Fi work. Like let's say you work in a big organization that just want Wi-Fi to work, so you work on the report you work on the design yourself, and then you might create some sort of documentation on your side and then implement the design, validate, and so on. But you might not utilize, the Ekahau reporting feature, or you might not even share your documentation with other people, right?
Yeah, they might not find a benefit with the report because they just want you to do the work and make sure everything is configured properly and all that. So yeah, who is a target recipient of this report is another good one.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you have to keep in mind when you create your report. If you work for a VAR, or if you work as a consultant, that's another deal. Like report is pretty much your deliverable. So that's how the customer will see your work, right? On top of testing, obviously the quality of the Wi-Fi. Most of what the customer will get is just a report from your PDF file. Right, especially if you're just hired to do design, you just send the report and that's pretty much it, right? So the customer is going to pay money pretty much for a PDF file. So you want to make sure that that PDF file reflects your work in a good way, and you want to make sure you spend spend time to make it look good and reflect your work.
And I think because Wi-Fi is invisible to everybody, sure, the end client, your customer, if you're talking as a VAR or you're doing consulting work, a very well operated Wi-Fi network is going to look good to the end users. But sometimes you want to show more of your professionalism that goes into and your expertise that goes into your designs. And so having a report generated that shows the details of, okay, here's where the access points are going to be installed because of all these factors like your coverage, your capacity, and then you can detail all of those, right? Especially if you're trying to estimate like airtime utilization, where a high density area, what's that going to look like to the end user or the client? They don't necessarily know. So this gives them something tangible to apply to the work you've done. And I think the way you create the report should be able to provide a little bit more value to the work you've actually done.
Yes. You can add your 2 cents, your personal feel to it. You can explain some of the choices you've made, and then pass this information through to the customer. Something else, like if you think about it, when you do consulting work, how do you get your customers? One way of getting your customers is word of mouth, right? You worked with someone, they liked what you did, and then they talked about you to one of their friends, and then you end up working for their friend, and that's one way you can get customers. So in one way too, if you push it really, if you push it a little bit more, you can see your report as a marketing document for your company as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. You can create like a sanitized version of the report, so it doesn't show like a previous customer's details, but you could use that in your sales process, or someone who's saying, hey, I want to hire you to do design work and Wi-Fi work for me, but what does your work look like? You could send them a report and show them how detailed you are, how you do your planning process, kind of educating the end user as how you do things and how you do your design. So yeah, it can be used in as a way to get more business.
One thing is that producing a quality report takes time. It takes a little bit of time on making sure everything is nice. You have the right information. You're taking time to organize the information nicely, making sure you know who you're sending the report to. So if you're sending the report to a manager, you might not put as much information as if you were sending a report to an engineer versus sending a report to an installer. So you want to make sure you target who you're talking to, and then you adapt the content of the report depending on who you're sending the report to.
Yeah, this is where a lot of the writing skills is very important.
Yeah, you're right. It's very important. And I used to sometimes it's a little bit difficult to because it's going to take you time to produce the report. So sometimes you charge for reporting, but sometimes the customer is like, okay, it's going to take you as much time to do the report and do the survey. What's up with this, right?
Yeah.
So that's when the custom template comes in, right? It allows you to save a whole bunch of time.
Oh yeah.
And produce a quality report with pretty much faster than what you would do if you were just to do it from the ground up.
Yeah, for sure. And I think saving time is what we're all looking forward to, right? Because that gives you more time to do other work. And before we get into these tips, I do want to tell everybody that we do have a download of some template files that you could use. If you haven't used any templates before, Ekahau does come with some default templates, but we also included some files for you that you could use in Ekahau and run them, and then you can modify them however you feel fit. You can change out some of the images and add or remove detail, and it's a good starting place if you're looking to do some sort of reporting, getting into it. So we're going to include an executive report template and also a predictive survey report template for you guys to try out.
Yeah, and then we're going to talk about a couple of tips you can use when working with the Ekahau template reports, and maybe at the end we can share our experiences and how we do things, and hopefully it's going to give you a little bit more guidance into getting into it and maybe trying it out for yourself on some of the project you're working on.
Yep. Cool. So why don't we get into the first tip?
Sure. So the first tip we have for you guys is use testing files. So working on the, if you're not familiar with Ekahau template reportings, pretty much you're going to work on the template, and a template is a Word document. So it's kind of like any Word document that you would use to write a report, except that you can insert tags. JSON tags into your Word document, and then anytime you add a JSON tag, Ekahau will interpret that as kind of like as a programming language, and it will go and get some information from your project and then export it to the report. So the templates, you're going to have two types of information in the templates. You're going to have the JSON tags that will go and get the information from your project. And then you're going to have your general layout. So anything that's not inside the tag will just appear as is in your final report. So you can pretty much set up the layout that you want. If you have a nice template with your company, you can reuse the template of your company. If you want to use a particular font, a particular size, you can pretty much change all of that. If you want some text to be there in every report, you can just put it there as well. And you create the general structure and layout of your reports outside of the tags. And then whenever you need information from the project, let's say, signal strength, image, or, a table of all of your APs, you're going to use the tags in order to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think this is where the learning curve begins, because you do have to understand what tags can be used and how they are used. So that way you can create a template that, one, doesn't have a lot of errors, and then two, that flows nicely with what kind of data you're trying to show. So if you're trying to show data for each floor and for X number of APs, there's a certain way you can do that with the tags, and there's loops. So it's almost like you're programming something within Word to grab data from your Ekahau file.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And if we just summarize the workflow on the workflow of working on the Ekahau template, is pretty much you create your template in Word, including your JSON tags, and then you run that against your Ekahau project in order to generate your final report. If you have some errors on your JSON tags, Ekahau will tell you have some errors. So you can go back in Word and then pretty much debug your code, debug your JSON tags, making sure everything is nice, you don't have any errors anymore. And then you go back to Ekahau, you run the template again until you don't have any errors. If you don't have any errors anymore, Ekahau will produce the report, will generate the report for you, the final report. And then we'll open it in Microsoft Word for you. And then what will happen at that point, you will check your final report and you will see that it doesn't really match what you wanted to do exactly. So you go back into your template, you fixed a couple of things, and then you go back to Ekahau, regenerate the report. And it's like an iterative process of tweaking, generating until you're happy with the final results. So if you've done programming before, it's kind of like the same process. You code, you debug, and then you adjust your code to make sure that the final results is exactly what you expected.
Yeah, it's going to take some time as you go through this. And I go through this every single time I create a new template. And it's just something you're going to go through. And I would highly recommend that you create a copy of whatever template you're using and work on the copy, so that way you don't modify the original and have a problem where you can't get back to a working file. So that way you have a backup.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I always use a create testing file. So I would have like the master template, which would be like the final template I would use to run against my project. And then from that, I just create a testing file where I test one section of the report, of the master template report, one section at a time. So the advantage that it gives me is that I'm focusing on one piece of code. So it's easier to debug, right? You're not debugging issues after issues after issues. You're just focusing on one piece of code. And it's also faster to test. Because every time you test, you're going to regenerate a report. So let's say in your master template, you have loops after loops, and you're looping on APs, you're looping on floors, and you have 100 APs in your project. It's going to take a little while to generate the report. So if you just focus on one section, and just, what I would do sometimes as well is I create a copy of my Ekahau project where instead of having 100 APs, I would have like 2-3 APs.
Yeah, so that's the other thing too.
Even if I do a loop on APs, I only do a loop on 2-3 APs, and it's much faster.
Yeah, because you like Francois said, you want to work on, if you're making modifications, modify one piece of the code and validate that works. Instead of editing a whole bunch of code and then not knowing where your problem is right off the bat. And then testing that against a file that's not an Ekahau design, that's not large, because it will take time to process reports, especially if you have a loop that says do this for every floor or do this for every single AP. That's gonna eat into how long it takes you to create this template.
Yeah, I totally agree. So what you could do to summarize the first tip, which is use testing files. So what you could do is you could create a second template document to do your testing, and you could create a second Ekahau file, or you could just copy paste the design you're working on and then remove some elements into it. So just the testing process of working on your report it is faster. And once you're sure that your template is good to go, you put everything back into your master template document, and then you run it against your real project. And then at that time, you're sure that the end result will meet your expectation. Yes, it might take some time. Sometimes it takes 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on how fast your computer is and depending how big your project is. But at least you only have to do it once during your testing. You can just work on small portion of codes, and it's much faster.
Cool. So what's the second tip, Francois?
Second tip is put as much information as you can in the Ekahau project. So if you've never worked with template reporting, you will tend to just do your design the way you do it in Ekahau, and then do the report yourself. And then when you do report, you add more information in the report. You will add, the name of the customer, the address of the location you're designing for. You would add maybe, the location of the MDF, IDF. And the name of the switch that you're going to be using for your design. Maybe you're going to talk about the requirements, the SSID, and how you're going to configure your SSID. And all of this information, you add it to your final report. What you can do in order to save some time is you can add all this information into your project file, into your Ekahau file, and we'll tell you how you can do that. And then you can reuse that information when you create your template. And so you can pretty much have one template that you could apply to different projects that you can reuse over time, as long as you put enough information inside your Ekahau project files.
Yeah, and this part is very useful because then now you don't have to open the document and have to search for, like the previous customer that you wrote this for, and then make sure you replace that with the new customer. With this detail, there is a tag in there for like the customer name, and then anywhere you put that in the template, it's just going to use that customer name that's attached to that Ekahau file. So that way you can just focus on creating a report quickly, and then not have to worry about, okay, which parts do I have to edit and remove because that was specific to a different client, for example.
Exactly. So if you actually go in Ekahau, you have a menu called Project. And then if you click on Project, all the way at the bottom, you have something called Project Notes. And if you click on Project Notes, you can have a pop-up window where you can add more information about your project. You're going to have a field for the name of the project, the name of the customer, the name of the engineer or owner, the location, the address of the location, and you have a note. You also have a text box for a note. And that's information you can reuse after that in your report. So if you think about just the front page of your report, sometimes it's nice to have the name of your customer, the location and the project you're working on. So you could reuse those properties, those project properties into your final reports when you export it. So that's one piece of information you can add. Example of other information I usually like to add is you can use a cable note to estimate how long the cable will be between the AP and the MDF IDF. In Ekahau, it's a tool called project cable notes. The only thing you have to be worried about, be mindful of, is that it only gives you the length in 2-dimensional. And the cable, we both know the cable could go up and down when they run it. So you might want to add a little bit of a margin to the cable length Ekahau gives you, but that's still useful information because you can visualize it on the map.
Yeah, and that's data because of the scaling that you put on the floor plan.
Yes, it will measure it depending on your scaling. What I like to do for those is if you have multiple MDF and IDF, I like to use multiple colors for the cable nodes. You can actually select different colors. So, all the APs connected to the MDF will be one color, and then all the APs connected to IDF number 1 would be a separate color. And so you can visualize, where the AP will be connected to, and it's easier for the installers and the customer as well, because that's the information they always ask for. You can also add the location of the MDFs and IDF. I used to do that like in a Visio document where I would just, create, outlined the location of the MDF, IDF. Now I do it in Ekahau with attenuation areas, which with a 0 dB loss. I just set a 0 dB loss so it doesn't impact my predictive design, but you can see it on the map.
That's a good idea. And then you make it a color that stands out, right? So that way they can see it and you give it a name.
Exactly. Yeah. You can give it a color. I usually have one color for the MDF and another one for the IDS, but you could just do whatever you want. And then the name of the AP is another element you can add into the Ekahau document. You can rename your APs. So if you already know the naming convention, you can add that information into your report, and then everyone can reuse them. The installers, the customer, the person that deploys, provision the APs if it's not you. So you can add this information as well. You can also add the capacity requirements, right? If you click on if you define an area and then you edit this area, you can add the number of devices, type of devices, type of bandwidth they'll be using on the Wi-Fi. So you can define everything. First of all, it will help you to do your capacity planning within Ekahau, and that's information you can reuse in your reports.
Yeah, and that part's important too if you're doing a predictive report, because you're going to design based on coverage and capacity requirements. So if you put that into your report in a table, the end user would know that this has been designed per those requirements. And I think that's usually an important detail I like to add in there, and have language in there that says this design was based on the requirements I gathered from you, and here's a table of what those requirements are.
Yeah, that's very important. I put it usually at the beginning of the report, just to make sure everyone is on the same page. I like to define the areas, and then at the beginning of the report, I will have like a section that says area to cover, and then you can visualize the different areas. Ekahau gives you the square footage of the meter square, and then you can specify your capacity requirements per area. And so anyway, you have a whole bunch of information you could include into your project itself. You can even add notes, like we didn't talk about AP notes. You can add images to your APs that you could reuse later. You can have a picture notes that you can attach to your project and you could reuse later.
And I use those types of notes.
The need for depending on your needs.
I like to use picture notes for installers. So if I've already gone to the location, I know where I want to put the APs. I take a picture of the location just so the installer knows exactly where I want it. And a lot of times I edit the photo on the computer first, and I have an arrow that says this is exactly where the AP goes. It's not up here in the HVAC. It's right here below the on the T-bar, and then I upload that image to each AP that's on the predictive map. And then when you create the report, there is a tag in there to show the AP image, and then you could also have other details show within the report, like the AP power configuration, what channel it's on. So you can get really detailed into these reports.
And under the AP, you also have, I don't know if I have in my other tips. No, we could talk about this for hours, but under the AP, you have the AP note. And I usually use that for any specific, installation notes that I want to transfer to the installers. So let's say, it has to be installed on a drywall ceiling, so you can specify, okay, a specific bracket will be required. Or if you're using directional antenna, you could say, please install the antenna outdoor, the AP indoor, please run the RF cable through the outside wall of the building, please seal the hole you create, or any information that would be useful and help the installer to do their job properly.
Yeah, man, that's a good use of using notes, AP notes.
And that's something that if you put in your project in Ekahau directly, when you generate your report, you don't have to touch that later on. Everything will be included in your report.
Yep, exactly. You do everything within Ekahau and then just add or modify in the final report as you see fit.
Yeah, I mean, it's not perfect. Like, some information you won't be able to put in Ekahau, so you're gonna have to add it later on in your report. But if most of the information you'll be able to put in Ekahau, so that's pretty useful. All right, so let's move on to the third tips, which is prepare your floor plans beforehand. So a lot of people have been asking, some simple image editing features in Ekahau, like rotate a floor plan, crop a floor plan, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Crop would be a big one.
Yeah, that would be, if we could just rotate it and crop it, that would be enough for me. But like for now, once you import your floor plan in Ekahau, that's it. That's done, right? That's how it will appear in your report. So you have to think about how your floor plan looks before you start your project, because this is just how it will be exported into your report. So if you have a whole bunch of white space around your floor plan and then you export it into your report, then you end up having a very small image for your, for your signal strength. You're going to end up cropping each image in your report, and that's time consuming. You don't want to do that.
And the reason why you want to focus on this first is because this is the image you're uploading to do your design work on, right? So, excuse me, if you want, when you're uploading the DWG file, here's an example of why you'd want to make sure you prepare this floor plan first, is because I've once received a floor plan for a whole floor, but the client was only on the top corner of that floor. So I have all this excessive white space or unused space that does not need to be displayed on the final report. Otherwise, it's you see the whole floor plan, but it's just a little tiny corner that I need to show the data on. And that part, if within Ekahau had a cropping feature, that would be great, right? So that way you can get rid of all the unnecessary parts of the floor plan where the client or the customers aren't going to be, where they don't need your signal in. And that way you can fit this image properly within your report. And like Francois said, you don't want to crop every single image after the fact, because that just takes too much time.
Yeah. So different way you could do it. If you're dealing with images, you can just use simple imaging tools to crop the image before you import it into Ekahau. If you're dealing with PDF files, what I do is I pretty much use I use my big screen, my big 4K screen, to open it to the max, and I take a screenshot of only the section I want, and that's usually good enough image quality to then do my design on and my report on. And so I don't import it as PDF, I import it as an image instead. And if you're dealing with DWG, you can actually use software like AutoCAD to open the DWG and then create a different viewpoint.
Now, is that free, AutoCAD?
Yeah, AutoCAD. Yeah, that's the one I use. For the work we do, AutoCAD LT, which is AutoCAD Lite, is enough, because we only deal with 2Ds anyway. We don't deal with 3-dimensional.
And that works for both PC and Mac?
Sorry?
Does that work for both PC and Mac?
Good question. I can confirm for Mac, because I've used it. It's also it works as a subscription based, so you can just pay it for the month if you just need it for the month.
Gotcha.
Or you can just purchase it for the year. I think you can use free software as well. I've heard about DriveSite to edit the DWG, but I've never used it myself. So maybe some people listening to the show can comment and give us other alternative. But yeah, you could create another viewpoint that you could reuse when you import the DWG file in Ekahau.
Okay.
And then your viewpoint, you can just focus on the part of the floor that you worry about, that you really want to design for, that you want to see in your final report. What's something else you can do with DWG files is create PDF files out of the DWG files that will only show you exactly what you want to see. So it's kind of like, a print to PDF feature, but you can select exactly the section of the floor plan that you want to export in the PDF.
Okay.
So anyway, different ways of doing it, but you can do it before importing your floor plans in Ekahau, and then after that, when you generate your report, you don't have to touch your images at all. Everything will be nice and neat.
Very cool.
All right. So next tips number 4, keep your layout simple. So here we're talking about the layout of the document, of the report. I found that if you start to use advanced Microsoft Word tools, if you start to draw arrows or create shapes, or play with the layout of the images, that might not carry on when you generate your report with Ekahau.
Okay.
So I try to keep it simple. I know, Rowell, you like the minimalist style, so I keep you in mind when I do my layouts.
Thank you.
To keep it simple, but you can have something simple and still looking good.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
That's what I try to aim for, something simple but still looks good. And then if I really need to add some details, if I really need to add some arrows or legends and stuff like that, I would just create it on another piece of software and then take a picture and then import that as a picture in the report. So you could do that with Visio, or on Mac I use OmniGraffle, or anywhere, anything else. You could even do it on Word and then take a screenshot and then import it into your report if you really need it.
Yeah, I just think when you're talking about this layout, just keep in mind who's going to be reading this report, and you do want them to read it. So you don't want them to be confused about how they're going to interpret the data and then come back to you with more questions.
Yes, it will always happen though.
It will, but try to minimize the amount of questions.
If you don't have any questions, I would be worried.
Yeah, I still get questions, but you don't want. I just try to refrain people from asking like really bad questions, like, "Oh my God, why is it like this?" kind of thing, or when you're trying to explain something properly, or maybe the layout just doesn't make sense to them. So, like where you put specific content also is important, like in which order.
Yeah, and what I do as well is I use the questions that I receive from customer to improve my template as well. So like maybe that wasn't clear enough, so maybe I can improve it, and you can work like that too.
Yeah.
All right, so the next tip is don't be afraid of using the landscape mode.
Yeah, that's my favorite mode.
That's your favorite tip?
Yeah, I like landscape.
So, well, this is just related to the type of floor plans we get, right? Most of the time, the floor plans we get are in a landscape mode. So if you just put them on the portrait mode report, the image will be smaller than just if you were just to put it on the landscape mode report. So it's kind of like common sense, but that's something we're not used to work with, right? Mm-hmm. And also, this is especially true for the information we're going to send to the installers. Because the installers, what they will do is they will either print the report out to get the information, or they will just have it on an iPad or a tablet. Yeah. Right? And the tablet, you can hold it in a landscape mode. It's pretty natural to anyone. And the piece of paper as well, right? They will just carry it and hold it in the landscape mode. So what I like to do is when I create a template, I like to create a template and then have one version of the template in the portrait mode, and then have the same template but in the landscape mode. And then depending on the floor plan I'm receiving from the customer, I can choose which one is most appropriate to do the job.
Yeah.
That's about it. And we do have a last tip. I wanted it to be like a 5 tips, but I don't know. I guess we found another one, so it's a bonus tip.
Bonus.
So this one is the last one is called dig into the Ekahau documentation.
Yeah, this is a must.
Yeah, going back to what Rowell said at the beginning, at the beginning when you start working with templates, you're asking yourself which tag can I use, and can I make this? Can I make this happen? And you don't really know when you start with those. That's why you start looking at what other people have done. You could start off looking at the templates we've added along with this recording on the show notes. You can also look online. Nick Turner from Ekahau shares some templates of his own on a Google Drive. Maybe we can add that to the show notes.
Yeah, he's contributed a lot of
people
different.
are doing. Or you could look also in the Ekahau documentation to see exactly which tag you could use. I've done that sometimes, and you actually discover some things. You're like, oh, I can do that. That's cool. And then you can test it out for yourself and see if it works.
And I think when we talk about using images in a report, probably one of the biggest tags I use is the visualization that you create and how big that visualization is going to be on the report itself. So you can set a width on those images, and that way you don't have to resize every single one because it doesn't fit properly on the page. You can just, in the tag, say this is how wide I want the image to be, and then it just does it for you. So that way it's less editing again on your end once the report has been generated.
Yeah, that's a very good tag, useful tag. And regardless of the image you have, it will always take the same amount of space on your report, so you don't have to worry too much if you're doing a loop on different type of images.
Yeah, this is a page that the Ekahau documentation on these tags is something I have up next to the Word document template that I'm using to create the template, because there's tags that you want to know, okay, what parameters can I use for this tag? So when you're looking at signal strength, for example, that's a common visualization everyone uses. Are you going to visualize 2.4 only, 5 gigahertz only, or are you going to do both? There's a tag in there that says, which one do you want to visualize? So it's either 2, 2.4, 5, or all. And so you can define whatever you want on those tags. Just look at what those parameters are, what could be used. There's some things that have been deprecated with the newer versions of Ekahau. So look at any of the older templates and be sure you're not using deprecated tags, because eventually those won't work when you do or generate a report.
And you can even learn that you can do if then else statements. You can use if then else statements on different parameters. So on top of doing loop, you can do if then else statements. You can even have a count tag, so you can count object. So let's say you're doing a loop on AP, you could count your APs.
Yeah.
Which is pretty useful if you want to come up with, a table that tells you how many APs you have in your design.
Mm-hmm. And you can even go further, and with that table and the loop, with the count of APs, show what channel those APs are on and what transmit power those APs are on in a simple table.
Yeah, you could do that as well. So anyway, we're not going to talk more about this. We're going to let you guys dig into the documentation and find any tag you would see useful for your projects. You can also comment if you find something interesting that you want to share with everyone. You can comment in the show notes.
I think these were great tips, Francois. I mean, let's go over them again. Like tip number 1 was use test files Tip number 2 was put as much information as you can within the Ekahau project, because that's what's going to be put into your report. Tip number 3 is prepare your floor plans. So make sure you only have what's going to be in your design within that floor plan. So that way, when you export it, that's what shows and not the excess stuff. Tip number 4, keep the report layout simple. Start simple and then add to it as you find that whatever requirements you need to add in there, that's what you can add to it. Tip number 5, don't be afraid to use landscape layout. My favorite layout is to use landscape. And then tip number 6, use the documentation. So dig into that and then learn how you could use reports with these tags and become more efficient. And then don't forget to hit up the show notes, cleartosend.net/145, and we have a free download of 2 templates that you could use if you're just going to get started. You can use these templates, modify them how you want. They're pretty simple templates, and you could see like what's possible, what can you do, and get going on these reports.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I would add is just make sure when you create the report, you know who the target audience will be. So for my projects personally, I've been a fan of creating multiple templates actually. So I have one that will be more for like as an exec summary that I would give to the managers, and that would have like the important information for them. So usually I try to put the bill of material or location of APs, signal strength, and I try to keep it simple. Like the managers are not going to read hundreds of pages of Wi-Fi design report. I also have a second template that's more detailed, where I put more information, more targeted to the architect or the engineer, and then I have a third template for the installers, where I only specify AP installations, AP location, and then I make sure they have enough information to do their work properly. So you don't be afraid to use different type of templates depending on who you're sending your report to. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing these tips, Francois. I thought they were very helpful.
No problem. And if you guys have any other tips, feel free to share them with us. We'll be happy to try to apply them.
All right. That's all we have for today's episode. So thank you guys for listening. If you have any questions, leave a comment on the show notes, or shoot us a message on social media. And if you found this episode useful, please go ahead and share it with your colleagues or your friends and whoever you think might be able to use this information. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you guys. See you.